Things have started falling apart in these countries. It's shocking to everyone because this is the first time its storm is taking a new dimension. The blow is brewing, and there is an ongoing tension that has embroiled in a bitter conflict over three tiny uninhabited islands of Mbanye, Cocotier, and Conga. Just imagine a world where borders are drawn not by the people who live there, but by distant powers with little regard for the land or its inhabitants. This is the legacy of colonialism, and nowhere is it more evident than in the dispute between Gabon and Equatorial Guinea over the oil-rich islands of Mbanye, Cocotier, and Conga. Do you know that the history of this conflict dates back to the colonial era, when European powers, particularly France and Spain, sliced Africa into territories that ignored ethnic and cultural realities?
Despite its international law obligations to respect this inherited situation, Gabon began efforts to alter the territorial map in 1970. After Spain had withdrawn its armed forces that protected Equatorial Guinea, and after oil companies had reported significant hydrocarbon prospects in the maritime areas adjacent to Mbanye, Cocoteros, and Conga.
The conflict itself started when colonial treaties was signed in the early 1900s. Specifically, a 1900 agreement between France and Spain that delineated borders but has been interpreted differently by both nations. The 1974 Bata Convention, which Gabon claims resolved the issue in its favor, has been challenged by Equatorial Guinea as incomplete and unofficial. You see, Gabon claims the islands based on a treaty from 1974, while Equatorial Guinea is firing back, insisting that the treaty is fake and doesn't count. It's like two kids fighting over the last slice of cake, but this cake is packed with untapped oil and gas reserves. Both nations are desperate for these resources, hoping to transform their economies and secure their futures. Why? Because colonial powers, in their greed, drew lines on maps that have created chaos and conflict for generations. The legacy of colonialism has sown seeds of division, turning neighbors into enemies and fueling a dangerous rivalry. Sadly, this is just one of the situations that exemplifies how the colonial past continues to haunt African nations, as boundaries drawn without regard for local dynamics have resulted in serious ongoing disputes and conflicts. The islands themselves are almost uninhabited, but sit on potential reserves of oil and gas, prompting both countries to assert their claims aggressively. But here's the twist. Instead of finding a way to settle this dispute among themselves, Gabon and Equatorial Guinea have turned to the International Court of Justice, ICJ, a foreign entity that will decide their fate. What does this say about their ability to solve their own problems? It's a glaring reminder that the colonial legacy still looms large over Africa. The International Court of Justice, ICJ, is now tasked with deciding which treaty holds more weight, the older 1900 document or the more recent 1974 agreement. Neither party can produce the original document of the Bata Convention, which raises questions about the legitimacy of their claims. Gabon's representatives insist that the 1974 treaty resolves all sovereignty issues, while Equatorial Guinea argues that Gabon has illegally occupied the islands since a military incursion in 1972. In the meantime, while these nations fight over their islands, the real tragedy unfolds. Africa, a continent rich in resources, continues to suffer. Why can't we, as African nations, unite and resolve our issues without relying on outsiders? Isn't it time to say enough is enough? This conflict is not just about islands. It's about the spirit of Africa itself. It's a call to arms. We must challenge ourselves to prioritize African solutions to African problems. Why are we allowing colonial divisions to dictate Africa's future? It's time for Africa to rise up and reclaim our narrative, fighting not against each other, but together for a better Africa. That is the wish. But the current state of affairs is disheartening. The African Union, touted as a solution to such conflicts, has remained largely ineffective, merely a toothless bulldog in the face of real challenges. With vast human resources at its disposal, why is it that the organization remains silent during crises across the continent? The conflicts in the Congos, Sudan, and Ethiopia have shown us that the AU's response is often muted, waiting for guidance from its paymasters in the West. The interests of African citizens have become secondary to those of foreign powers. But wait, this dispute is not just about land. It's a reflection of deeper issues of corruption and greed that plague many African nations. Leaders often prioritize personal or national gain over the welfare of their people, leading to decisions driven by the lure of oil and wealth rather than peace and cooperation. This greed and corruption didn't start today.
This is Mobutu Sese Seko, the former president of Zaire, now DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. Here in the video, you see him walking around his yard of one of his multi-million-dollar mansions that he left behind. Here he's walking around, showing off his wealth. He had giraffes and lions and zebras roaming around his yard. If you know the movie Coming to America, it is based on the true life of Mobutu Sese Seko. This is the man behind the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, the Pan-African leader who came to power and only wanted the best for his people. But Mobutu, backed by the CIA, overthrew Patrice Lumumba's government in a very sad way. His own people were turned against him. They unalived him like an animal. When Mobutu Sese Seko took over power in 1965, he was a ruthless dictator. He unalived thousands of people. He did not care whether his people were so poor and had nothing to eat. He amassed so much wealth. He had mansions all over the world. He had 20 wives and countless girlfriends. The same CIA kept Mobutu Sese Seko firmly in power. They helped him assassinate so many of his opponents. After he died, he left hundreds of millions in Europe, and Europe is still refusing to let that money go back to the DRC to this day. Mobutu Sese Seko. Now, what happened after his death? Look at his house now. It's ruins. Ruins. It's all ruins. Looks like they discovered the Roman Empire. It's all gone. This is the sad reality that we are facing here in Africa. Our leaders enriching themselves to the point where they are richer than Bill Gates. But their countries are so poor, and they don't even think that they are not going to the grave with this money. So many times this story is told across Africa. You hear of Frederick Chiluba of Zambia, same story. Daniel Arap Moi of Kenya, same story. Sani Abacha of Nigeria, same story. Everywhere you go in Africa, leaders who got so rich, they are gone and they leave everything behind in ruins. And they are gone. It is so sad because leaders in Europe, they always do things for the generations that are coming. The laws that they pass, the policies that they put in place, they are all about the generations that are coming in the future in Europe. If you look at the election in the United States, it's about issues like abortion. They want to leave women in the future generations that are coming to do what? To decide what they want to do with their bodies. Long after they are gone. But African leaders, it's a different story. They leave draconian laws that punish their own people long after they are gone. And it doesn't matter what age they are. They could be 96 years old and still pass laws that say they should stay in power until they die. That's the legacy that African leaders leave behind. And ruins of mansions that they built, some never even lived in.
Do you even know Mobutu's entry into politics was a terrible legacy behind? He was a ruthless dictator responsible for his country's downfall. Whatever DRC is facing today, he has a hand in the genesis. Most African leaders, past and present, are terribly corrupt and selfish. They hardly think of the future generations, and that's why the continent is where it is today, despite the abundant potentials. Similarly, the tragic story of Valentine Strasser, who became the youngest African head of state at just 25 years old after a military coup in Sierra Leone, illustrates the dire consequences of unchecked ambition. Strasser's early promise quickly turned into a nightmare as he squandered national resources on lavish living, abandoning the very people he was meant to serve. Even Strasser, at that young age, not only had wealth but also had the power to do anything he desired. He engaged in reckless extravagance and wasted resources that were supposed to be utilized for the good of the people. But what happened in the end, Strasser was overthrown in a coup by his deputy, Julius Maada Bio, in 1996. In an attempt to start his life anew, it was alleged the former head of state fled to London penniless. The Sierra Leone government later granted him amnesty, and he returned to the country where he allegedly now lived with his mother. He struggled to live daily, jobless and penniless. His reckless extravagance led to his downfall when he was overthrown by his deputy, leaving him jobless and penniless, a ghost of the leader he once was. Both of these stories are reflections of a larger narrative, a narrative that suggests that corruption is not merely an individual failure, but a systemic issue rooted in the past, backed by Westerners. More reason today, the whole Gen Z and older gather to celebrate Ibrahim Traoré for his boldness, unrelentless, selfless services, and his love for his people. I declare to you today, people of Burkina Faso, people of this continent, let join to protest Ibrahim Traoré. Remember, the win for one is the win for all. Traoré should be protected at all cost. Just as we have revealed many great things done by Traoré in our previous videos, and part of his recent achievement is revoking the licenses of Western corporations mining gold in his country. We will mine the gold ourselves, said the president, Ibrahim Traoré. Construction of the country's first refinery for gold, Burkina's main mineral resource, with production capacity of around 400 kilograms, 880 pounds, of gold per day, was started last year, November 2023, and it's expected to be launched before the end of the year. I am beginning to suspect that for any African country to succeed, it must do away with Western influence. This is not negotiable. It is a must. Otherwise, the worst is yet to come. Think of it. The colonial legacy not only divided nations, but also set the stage for leaders to emerge who prioritize their own interests over those of their citizens. Just in Gabon and Equatorial Guinea, this means that instead of working together to develop their countries, leaders engage in bitter disputes over resources, exacerbating tensions and leading to potential conflicts. So, the Gabon-Equatorial Guinea dispute serves as a vivid reminder of how colonial legacies and the pursuit of wealth can create rifts between neighboring countries. It poses critical questions about the future of African cooperation and development in a world still grappling with the shadows of its colonial past. Will these nations find a way to move beyond the greed and divisions of the past, or will they remain locked in a cycle of conflict fueled by the remnants of colonialism? This is a story that continues to unfold, leaving us all eager to see how it will end. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and sub,